So, I've been collecting notes on topics for a good couple years. According to Google Docs, I've been collecting notes on Koko since 2018, but I've only recently started making videos for YouTube. So when I dusted the script off to double check it, I'd found out that Michael Hobbs and Sarah Marshall already did a Koko episode on their excellent podcast You're Wrong About. And, well, without spoiling anything, they talk about the same stuff that I wanted to. So if this video sounds similar to their podcast, it's because it is. We're all drawing from the same well. But I've been collecting notes on things for too long to shelve this project now. Koko the gorilla couldn't talk. Wait, what? What do you mean Koko couldn't talk? Okay, so I talk to my cat. I'll give her love and affections, and I'll narrate tasks to her, and I'll scold her when she leaves a plate of chicken that I cooked for her, even though it's crispy on the outside and soft in the middle, which is exactly how she likes it. But why do I talk to my cat? More broadly, why do we talk to animals? Even more broadly, why do we give human traits to animals? Eagles look like this, and we'll say, that bird looks angry, but that's just its facial structure. It doesn't look angry. And what about objects?
I don't like the look of you.
You can trust me, Bob.
Yeah, but what about your friend? He looks really scary. I'm gonna cut you! Ah!
It doesn't feel weird to anthropomorphize inanimate objects. Why? And why is that such a common thing to do? Why is talking to animals or objects a thing humans do independently of one another across space and time and culture? Is it a deep need to be social? If my cat can't understand me, then my home's been opened up to an animal that I don't know, that doesn't pay rent and just pisses up the side of the fridge because she can. No, it's more than that. I might assign human characteristics to things that aren't human, but anthropomorphizing animals implies that the communication between humans and animals is one way. And if you've ever owned a pet, you know that's not true. It's hard to say that dogs understand their owners, but MRI scans of dog brains have revealed that they can register words, they can process meaningful ones, and they can distinguish between tone and body language. And with enough repetition, dogs can learn to correlate certain words with certain actions. Call your dog for walkies often enough, eventually the dog will associate the word with the activity.
Walkies?
German studies on a border collie called Rico found Rico could fetch objects he wasn't familiar with when instructed about 70% of the time using a kind of inductive reasoning. And a follow-up study on a border collie called Chaser found she could do the same thing, show awareness that certain words map to certain objects, and she could learn what those object word maps were. And it's not just dogs that possess these sorts of abilities. In a raccoon study, raccoons learned that they could use rocks to raise the water level in a tube to get a treat, and one raccoon just knocked the tube over. Cows can recognize individual faces. They might even have friends and enemies. Crows too can recognize faces, and they can also spot patterns in traffic, make tools, and they even show some evidence of collective learning. It turns out, animals might have far more complex inner worlds than we ever would have guessed. But there's never gonna be a cat-based civilization. I don't know, maybe because they sleep 20 hours a day. Or maybe because animal intelligence seems to have developed for the specific ecological niche it's needed. Cows and sheep put points into charisma because they're herd animals. Their focus is on social intelligence and remembering faces, whereas squirrels put points into perception, like remembering where they bury food. Neither of those things on its own could produce anything like culture or organized society. There has to be something unique about humans. So what is it? In some religions, what defines humans as unique is being made in the image of God, and that's how humans have defined themselves as special. Evolution puts a spanner in that idea, because evolution says that, well, we're not special in any cosmic sense, we're just one branch in a sprawling tree of life. So we've redefined ourselves by something else: intelligence. From an evolutionary perspective, we invested heavily in intelligence, and we invested very broadly. Social, spatial, abstract, lateral, existential dread, which, it turns out, isn't uniquely human. And if other traits of intelligence aren't uniquely human, that could include what feels like the most human of intelligences: language. There are two big ideas in linguistics regarding how we develop language: behaviorists and the Noam Chomsky school. The behavior school goes a bit like this. Remember our dog example from earlier? When you say walkies, the dog learns to associate the word walkies with the activity, and it's reinforced over time that when the word walkies is said, it means they'll go for a walk. Language works the same way. Children are like a chimp at a typewriter, tapping out nonsense, and eventually they'll hit a word. It might be mama, it might be dada, but it will be a word, and their parents will reward them with some sort of social affection. The child will learn, like the dog, that they will be rewarded for saying words, and thousands upon thousands of tiny reinforcements later we develop words, grammar, sentence structure, language. There's nothing intrinsically special about humans. Language acquisition, according to the behaviorists, is just the result of one giant, society-sized Skinner box. Chomsky disagreed. He argued that there were elements of language consistent across cultures, even with languages that developed roots entirely independent of each other. There are billions of words with near infinite combinations, and there are all these rules and idiosyncrasies within language. It can't develop via behavioral reinforcement. There's just too much stuff. If children are like the proverbial chimp with a typewriter, they'd be bashing forever. There's something about the human brain predisposed to language. Language is unmistakably human. If Chomsky was correct, then no non-human could ever acquire anything like language. At best, they could learn a handful of words and associations. If Skinner was correct, language could be taught to non-human species. All it would take for an animal to acquire language would be the correct procedure. Now, we have tried to teach animals we considered near human intelligence to speak, like dolphins and chimps, but it didn't work. One chimp, Vicky, was taught how to say a handful of words in the late 1940s.
Now who am I? Papa? Papa? Can you say what this is?
But Vicky's grasp of spoken language was well below what we see in children. What we learned through these experiments is that humans have very specific vocal structures that allow us to say and make certain noises that can form the basis of language. We can guess how long sentences will be and modulate our breathing accordingly, and we'll do it automatically. Physiologically, apes and dolphins couldn't learn spoken word. And into this void stepped sign language. You can't teach a dolphin to sign, not with those flippers. Conversing with dolphins is still a way off. But apes have dexterous hands, and they will use them to make gestures in the wild. Researchers into intraspecies communication thought they'd probably have more success teaching chimps to communicate on human terms if they use sign language. In 1966, a couple at the University of Reno started to teach a chimp called Washoe sign language instead of spoken word, and it paid off. They managed to teach her a vocabulary of about 132 signs. And one day, Washoe does something very interesting. The story goes that when Washoe was out with her trainer, she saw a swan and signed the word waterbird. Washoe was taking two disparate things, water and bird, and mushing them together to describe a third entity: the swan. This is how we develop language. This is how kids describe the world around them. This is how they learn sentence structure. And a chimp just did it. Washoe provided behaviorists with a prime counter to the Chomsky school. We can teach apes to do these things. We can teach apes language. Washoe was the catalyst to a whole host of psychological research trying to prove Chomsky wrong. And with that preamble out of the way, we can finally talk about Koko. Thanks to Washoe, a lot of primatologists were trying to get their hands on various apes to teach them sign language. One of these apes was called Koko. Okay, well actually she was called Hanabiko, meaning fireworks child, because she was born on the 4th of July. But anyway, Koko was born at San Francisco Zoo in 1971. At the age of 1, Koko was taken from her mother to be treated for a life-threatening illness. And it's here that she meets 24-year-old graduate student Penny Patterson. They start caring for Koko, and while caring for her, Patterson starts to teach Koko sign language. Patterson describes Koko's language acquisition in her 1978 paper, The Gestures of a Gorilla, Language Acquisition in Another Pongid, and a follow-up paper in 1990 called Language Acquisition by a Lowland Gorilla, Koko's First 10 Years of Vocabulary Development. After 10 months of teaching her sign language, Koko had learned about 100 signs, and like humans, Koko has a language growth spurt between the ages of 2 and 4, where Koko acquires new words very quickly. Like Washoe, Koko was combining words to communicate other things. She famously signed finger bracelet to communicate the word ring, and stuck metal to communicate the word magnet. Koko didn't just sign utterances for food and cuddles either. She'd discuss her relationships to people. She'd express parts and aspects of her personality. Koko would even lie. According to Patterson, my assistant, Kate Mann, was with Koko, then tipping the scales at 90 pounds, when the gorilla plumped down on the kitchen sink in the trailer and it separated from its frame and dropped out of the alignment. Later, when I asked Koko if she broke the sink, she signed, "Kate there bad," pointing to the sink. Koko wouldn't know, of course, that I would never accept the idea that Kate would go around breaking sinks. Koko would make art, and she had a thing for poetry. This is a self-titled picture that Koko painted called Pink Pink Stink Nice Drink. And she also named her kitten a rhyme, All Ball. Oh yeah, Koko had a cat. She couldn't get pregnant, but she really wanted to be a mom, so Dr. Patterson got her a kitten instead. Koko had a sense of time, and she could remember past events, like how she bit Penny when they first met. This was taken from an article that Patterson wrote in National Geographic documenting Koko's recollection of their first meeting with an interviewer. What did you do to Penny? Bite. You admit? Sorry, bite scratch. At this point, I showed Koko the mark on my hand. It really did look like a scratch. Wrong bite. Why bite? Because mad. Why mad? Don't know. Koko was a media sensation. She apparently shared quite a close bond with Robin Williams, and she became a big part of his stand-up routine on Broadway.
And she goes, "What does that mean?" "She wants you to lift your shirt." I lift my shirt. She reaches out and grabs both my nipples. And when an 800-pound gorilla's got you by the tits, you listen. And then a fun thing happened, because my balls went, "Somebody wants to play." "Shall we go to phase 2? "No, do not go to phase 2.
When he died, the story goes, Koko mourned his passing. 13 years after meeting him, Koko not only remembered him, she understood the finality of his death, and she grieved for him. At the height of Koko's fame, she'd learnt nearly 2,000 signs. She was on Mr. Rogers, she'd gotten 2 Nat Geo biographies, one of her taking a selfie in a mirror and the other with her kitten. The last message that Koko signed was an appeal to humanity. And this is where most accounts of Koko the gorilla stop. But I wouldn't have called this video Why Koko Couldn't Talk if that was the end of the story. So, strap in. So, if apes really could acquire language to the level that Koko did, why did all of the research into ape communication and ape language acquisition stop? To answer that question, and to understand why Koko couldn't talk, we have to talk about a chimp called Nim Chimpsky, who was adopted by Herb Terrace, professor of psychology and psychiatry at Columbia University. Up until this point, while the debate around the nature of language had been very intense and had opened up a lot of discussions about what the actual hallmarks of a language are, no one was questioning the value of the data being collected. When Terrace sat down to watch back the recordings of Nim, he was looking for some sort of pattern. Is Nim creating word orders? Has he acquired a concept of grammar? Does he follow linguistic rules like syntax? Does he follow socially learned linguistic rules like not interrupting at random intervals? And does Nim use private speech, as in, does he talk to himself? That kind of thing. Terrace published his findings in a 1979 paper called Can an Ape Create a Sentence? To which he answers, no. Going over the Nim footage, almost all of the signing that Nim does follows prompts from the communicators. Nim doesn't initiate conversation, he interrupts at random, he doesn't follow typical language structure of listen and respond, he doesn't use the signs to think in private moments, and all of these are things that you would observe in kids. Kids will initiate conversation, they will follow listen, respond, listen structures, they'll talk to themselves. Nim's most frequent three-word utterances are things like play me Nim, eat me Nim, eat Nim, eat. In fact, all of Nim's most frequent utterances are quite pragmatic. Feed me, play with me, tickle me, and who use the words interchangeably like eat Nim and Nim eat to mean the same thing. There's no concept of grammar there. A child would understand the difference between eat Nim and Nim eat. The longest sentence that Nim signs at 16 words is give orange, me give, eat orange, me eat orange, give me, eat orange, give me you. What you'll notice about this sentence is its repetitiveness. A kid wouldn't say something this devoid of meaning or structure. Children will elaborate on their utterances and they'll add complexity with time. Their sentences will get longer and convey more information as they acquire more language. Nim's, Terrace noticed, degraded with time. The words Nim signed were the equivalent of mashing the middle predictive text key in your phone to spell something out. Nim is trying to brute force a response to get food or some kind of social interaction. The paper Can an Ape Create a Sentence was a hand grenade to ape communications research. It all but admitted that Noam Chomsky was right, that there was something innate to humans that gives us the gift of the gab. In fact, Terrace published a book in 2019 with more or less that title. In an interview, Chomsky was very vindicated by this. In 1982, Terrace published a follow-up paper called Why Koko Can't Talk. And it's here where the cracks in the Koko story start to become noticeable. If you're deranged enough to work your way through the backlog of scientific publications from Penny Patterson and the Gorilla Foundation, then you'll find that most of the data for gorilla language skills come from unpublished internal use video created by Patterson, as well as unpublished lists of Koko's sign lexicon. Their 1978 paper, Recording Gestures in Gorillas, is a descriptive paper where Patterson describes Koko's earliest signs, but it's just that, a description. The 1990 study, like the 1978 one, is also descriptive. Patterson does provide an appendix and supplementary data, but it's threadbare information. It's a list of words and the order that Koko learned them. Patterson fails to provide any transcribed utterances. She relies on individual examples to support her interpretations. Without any sort of corpus of utterances, we can't glean anything useful from them, like finding the emergence of abstract rules. Patterson has never released any raw data or raw footage of her and Koko, which is an immediate red flag. It's claimed Koko has learned more than 2,000 signs and could make sentence structures, but there's very little in the way of raw data to actually prove this, which is an issue endemic in a lot of ape communications research. It's near impossible to verify the claims that apes have learned the number of signs that are being claimed. It's impossible to verify if Koko talks to herself, or babbles, or does any of the things that we observe in children. There's no hours and hours of raw film to sift through. To take from Professor Robert Sapolsky's lecture on human language.
And one problem at that point was there were no actual data that had ever been published by Patterson. All there were several heartwarming films of Koko and global warming and Koko and the trade deficit and Koko and this or that. And there were no data. Scientists couldn't make any sense of it because there were no numbers. There was no anything you can actually analyze.
And the available films aren't much better. Terrace has argued, like Nim, Koko's longer utterances are completely devoid of meaning. Things like mess red thirsty mouth thirsty and please milk please me like apple bottle. One of the few clips actually released by Patterson and Koko will involve things like this.
How do you say love? Oh. For sign language. How do you say love?
Can you show him how to say love? How do you say love? What that flower? She's asking you about your cufflink. Is that a flower?
That's a sun. And my grandfather gave me the...
Sun. It looks like a flower, though.
Does look like a
Can
flower.
we talk a little bit about love? Frown? Oh, honey. What? Love? Love. You.
Oh, it's that?
Said.
Oh.
Love you, visit love.
Koko is brute forcing signs until she gets it right so she can get a treat, and Penny is either prompting Koko or she's rationalizing away Koko's wrong answers.
Wet. Wet is like thirsty. Or, well, dry is like thirsty. Wet is like candy, gums. What is like candy, gums? Oh, did I forget something? I didn't. Black? Nuts? You're polite since you are.
When you spot it, this overinterpreting and rationalizing away wrong answers starts appearing everywhere. Here's a chunk of the transcript from the AOL interspecies chat session of which Koko was a part. What are the names of your kittens and dogs? Candy give me. Okay. C give me. What's the name of your kitty? Kitty's name and dog's name. Foot. Foot. Foot isn't the name of your kitty. Hair lip. Oh, she wants to hear the lady on the phone. Maybe you can ask her that question? Koko, what's the name of your cat? No. Do you like to chat with other people? Fine nipple. Yes, that was her answer. Nipple rhymes with people, okay? She doesn't sign people per se, so she may be trying to do a sounds like, but she indicated was fine. Terrace's articles kicked off a series of, shall we say, less than polite letters between him and Patterson. Terrace argued that Patterson isn't providing any raw data for scientists to analyze, #ReleaseThePatterson-Cut, and Patterson's argument revolved around Terrace being bitter about the failure of Project NIM. She argues caregivers have to form close bonds with their apes so they can feel comfortable communicating, and NIM just cycled through teachers. There was no closeness between Terrace and NIM.
There wasn't one figure for NIM. There were 25 maybe that came and went. It's so difficult because it's based on relationships. It's not just based on, open the cage, new person, feed, ask question. They want to talk with someone they like.
But the closeness Patterson says is necessary means that the caregiver is the only person able to translate for the ape, which means there's a lot of interpreting being done by the translators. How much of it is the ape communicating, and how much of it is the human interpreting it? Like Washoe signing waterbird to mean swan. That's us interpreting what Washoe is signing. Was she signing swan? She could have just as easily been signing the words water and bird. It could just be basic object recognition, rather than making compound words to produce something new. Terrace actually went over some of Washoe's raw data, and he included film traces in his study. In the longest film of Washoe's language drills, Teaching Sign Language to the Chimpanzee Washoe, Washoe makes 155 utterances, of which 120 were single signs, and they occurred mainly in vocabulary testing sessions. Washoe simply wasn't using sign language to communicate. Some counter that apes in research respond to human commands, and even if they are just mimicking signs, mimicry is a part of how we acquire language to start. But that's just it. The mimicking in human children gives way to language and non-mimicking behaviors. Apes never stop mimicking. Is training apes or birds to understand commands and mimic superficial aspects of language the same thing as language? Because you can teach a dog to follow human commands. Sit, lie down, roll over. Does that mean dogs understand English? Are apes doing anything more complicated than what your dog does when you call it for walkies? I'm not sure. Even the more saccharine stories of Koko get cast in a new light here. Like, fix Earth being Koko's last words? Like, what? Does Koko have an understanding of climate change? Did she school strike for climate? Did Penny read her IPCC assessment reports? Climate change and the environmental movements are things that matter to us. They motivate humans to action. Is it just a coincidence that one of the most pressing issues of our time also happened to be the last words of a gorilla who we are expected to believe managed to comprehend the connection between human action and climate change? No, says Snopes, because it was a doctored tape, and you can tell it is. It's filmed in jump cutter vision. The press release that actually accompanied the video says it was edited together from a number of other takes, and there's no transparency around how the video was made regarding what her signers were signing to her or other cues Koko could have been given, because of course there isn't. They don't release raw films. # release the Patterson cut. Unsurprisingly, Terrace's paper caused the whole field of ape communication to implode on itself. There was a big conference in 1980 where two researchers, Seebock and Rosenthal, effectively called the researchers in the field liars, cheats, and frauds, and actually called them liars, cheats, and frauds at the post-conference press release. Word got out and the government bodies who funded this research, understandably scared of the backlash to spending millions on dead-end research, cut their funding almost immediately. And now we enter the really dark time. Language, in many respects, is a vital part of the human experience, and language is interlinked with cognitive development in many important ways. When children have structured language, it helps them make sense of the world. And this is true whether the kids are communicating verbally or whether they're using signs and gestures. When deaf people have strokes, it affects their ability to sign in the same way it affects a hearing person's speech. When we give deaf kids language, it massively helps their cognitive development because it gives them a language they can use to express themselves. Deaf kids will sign gibberish the same way that hearing kids will speak gibberish. Speaking to BBC News, Professor Graham Turner of Heriot-Watt University said these languages use the face, body, and hands in an integrated way, exploiting their multidimensional spatial medium through the layering of simultaneous and extremely precise visual elements. So communication in ASL, or any other sign language, entails acquiring command of a far more complex system of linguistic expression. I bring this up because sign language is a language in its own right, and it needs to be treated as such. Language is about the transmission of information. ASL has features that reflect the fact it's a visual language. It has a different structure, word order, and grammar to spoken English. For example, what kind of cookies do you like would be arduous to sign, so it's turned into cookie you like what kind. And there's no universal sign language either. Across the English-speaking world, you have ASL in the United States and Canada, BSL in the UK, ISL in Ireland, Auslan in Australia, and NZSL in New Zealand. ASL and ISL are more closely related to French sign than British sign, so ASL and BSL have radically different structural components, word orders, plurals, rhymes, and innuendos. And within sign languages, you will get quite substantial regional variations. Sign language has dialects. That might surprise a lot of people, but it shouldn't. We expect spoken word to have these sorts of variations. Why not sign language? Associated Professor of Linguistics at the University of Birmingham, Adam Shembri, says Koko didn't master ASL, she mastered modified ASL, which Patterson's 1990 paper acknowledges. Human hands are way more dexterous than gorilla hands. There are some signs that Koko physically can't make, so she uses ASL, but will switch to gorilla sign language, GSL, to sign certain words like bird. The issue is that the researchers who worked with Koko, and other apes for that matter, didn't know sign language. According to the journalist Autumnmnmn, who wrote the book The Other Side of Silence, Sign Language in the Deaf Community in America, researchers in ape communications didn't treat sign language as a language. Rather, researchers learned floating signs, that is to say, individual words, and then just assumed that they could slap English on top of it and call it a day. They imposed English oral features and English oral grammar onto ASL. For example, Patterson's papers on Koko state that Koko's two sign combinations are semantically equivalent to the two-word utterances of a child. Her evidence for this is Koko using spoken word orders, agent, action, attribute, object. ASL doesn't use spoken word orders. Another example, Koko's rhymes. In ASL, the principle of rhyming is that rhymes look similar. They have visual rhythm. So hi swing arms, cat whiskers fiddle is a rhyme in ASL because swing arms has a similar movement to fiddle. So Koko's poem, pink, pink, stink, nice drink. Pink, stink, and drink are words that rhyme in spoken English. In ASL, this is pink and this is stink. Not very similar, are they? Only slightly less amazing than Koko's ability to create rhymes and to understand Pig Latin is her professed ability to substitute a sign for an English hominin of a word she does not know. For example, Patterson says that when Koko had difficulty articulating need, she would occasionally use knee, a sign that sounds like need but is made in sign language in an entirely different manner. She also, on occasion, interchanged signs for I, no, no, and 11, lemon. These are mistakes a person learning spoken English might make, but here are the American signs for I and I, no, no, 11, lemon, need, knee. It's the same with the AOO interspecies chat. Nipple sounds like people. Sounds like. In spoken English. Which Koko doesn't know. This is the sign for nipple, and this is the sign for people. That is not a substitution you would make. Koko might have been communicating even less than initially suggested. And not just Koko either. All apes involved in ape communication studies weren't really communicating, at least not using sign language. There was a catastrophic failure by the researchers in ape communications to treat sign language as its own form of communication. They took a very oralist approach to a non-oral language, and it was an approach researchers weren't interested in correcting. According to an interview NICA conducted with someone who worked on the Washoe project, I wasn't there long. There was a very high turnover among the deaf. The gardeners wouldn't listen to anything the deaf people told them about ASL. They thought we didn't know anything about it and we were just trying to make trouble. There are 3 shifts in a day. I'd go in, wake up the chimp, change the diapers, and put clothes on. Sit him in a chair and warm up milk, just like for children. I put a little bit of milk in the cup and I waited for the sign drink, thumb in mouth. I made the drink sign, waited. When he made it, I'd put a few drops in the cup and waited for the sign again. He folded his hands and sat back, waiting. By this time the chimp was screaming, even I could hear it. I wasn't supposed to give any food until he made the eat sign. I watched really carefully. The chimp's hands are moving constantly. Maybe I missed something, but I don't think so. I just wasn't seeing any signs. The hearing people were logging every movement the chimp made as a sign. Every time the chimp put his finger in his mouth, they'd say, "Oh, he's making the sign for drink," and they'd give him some milk. For part of the day, I was just supposed to sign to the chimp about things he knew. Things around the place that he knew the signs of. I signed my head off. That's what I was being paid to do. But mostly, the chimp didn't seem to notice. NICA also interviewed a woman called Lauren Petito, who worked on the NIM project. She said, "Nim didn't do anything with the signs. He only used them for requesting things, and even that's too anthropomorphic a description. He never used them in the deeper human sense of making a request. It was an entirely different sort of transaction. Nim could never quite understand he was communicating. He never used the sign as a cognitive tool, and I do not believe that he used them to think with. He was never able to make certain connections. We imposed those connections of meaning and communication. He had his own powerful, deeply wired communicative devices. What we added was insignificant. It didn't really add a thing." Dr. Gerardo Ortega, who specializes in the acquisition of sign language, went one step further and said Koko never mastered sign language. At most, she ritualized the use of some signs about the here and now and used them only after her trainer prompted her. To quote Professor Graham Turner again, "Serious efforts to teach apes some signing began in the 1960s with researchers attempting to teach individual signs derived from American Sign Language, ASL. And the apes did learn to use some hand gestures in this way. But it is a distortion to imply that Koko or any other ape has ever learned to use a natural sign language like a human being. Although the apes can use 2 or 3 signs in a sequence, close inspection of the film data has repeatedly shown trainers prompting them and then questionably interpreting separate responses as signed sentences." Now, some people will feel I'm being harsh here. After all, some people might have watched Koko and have been inspired to learn sign language to communicate with friends who are deaf. In fact, some people have learned ASL after being inspired by Koko so they could talk to their deaf friends. And not to get on my high horse about it, but why didn't your friend inspire you to learn sign? You know, the person who was in your life and stood to directly benefit from you learning it. Why did it take teaching sign language to a species that couldn't possibly gain anything from knowing it to pique your interest? Why wasn't the basic human right to be understood and afforded language not a good enough reason for you? To quote The Other Side of Silence, Sign Language and the Deaf Community in America's chapter on ape communication, during the spring of 1979, I realized that I had been meeting a number of people, hearing people, who were very excited about ASL. Not because 500,000 deaf Americans use it every day, but because they believe it might be taught to apes. You know the expression, don't show 'em how the sausage is made? Well, a lot of ape research could be summed up with the phrase, don't get too attached to these creatures. With the publication of Terrace's paper, funds for ape communications were withdrawn, basically overnight, and the whole research field just collapsed. So, imagine you're a researcher, and one day all your ape money just goes, and suddenly you're lumbered with a gajillion apes to feed and house. What do? Well, the answer for many was to either have their apes killed or sent to Tiger King zoos with little oversight in their day-to-day operations. Abuse in these facilities is quite common. One ape we haven't talked about was Kanzi the bonobo, who used lexicograms to express himself. Sue Savage Rumba, a researcher at Yerkes at the time, oversaw Kanzi's training. Kanzi quickly built up a lexigram vocabulary of more than 400 symbols and was said to be able to form compound words. Lexicograms tie specific symbols to words, so it's less ambiguous than sign is for non-sign users, and there's less room for interpretation from humans. And lexicograms can use grammar that researchers would be familiar with. Kanzi uses the lexigram and gets the right words 9 times out of 10, and he'll show things like if-then sentence structures, and Savage Rumba showed Kanzi could respond correctly to verbal commands without facial cues from her.
Could you put some soap on your ball? Well, that's a good job.
But, again, the vast majority of Kanzi's language use was asking for food or asking for toys, and our border collies from the start of this video could use inductive reasoning to figure out what object or symbol was related to a particular word and command. Is that using language the way humans do? I don't think it is. When the research money went, Savage Rumba set up a facility to house Kanzi called the Great Ape Trust.
I'm not gonna have it!
The Great Ape Trust had its many abuses documented in an employee open letter with supporting emails and documents. There were cases of unauthorized pregnancies, usually incest pregnancies, and unsafe housing conditions for the 7 bonobos in the trust's care. One bonobo, Tico, poured boiling water onto his stomach. In another incident, Tico ingested Head & Shoulders shampoo, and he needed medical attention. Staff reported Tico was vomiting and had diarrhea, and Dr. Savage Rumba attributed that to eating non-organic baby food, rather than Tico eating rotten foods and candle wax. In one incident, a student threw a bucket at an ape after it spat. The organization was disbanded following this controversy and recreated as the Ape Cognition and Conservation Initiative to learn and do better than the abuses of the Great Ape Trust. And I might have believed them if they didn't use Kanzi to judge state food fairs after. So, Nim's life is also pretty bleak. He spent a lot of his life being sent from place to place and from carer to carer. The first family to take Nim in lived on the Upper West Side of Manhattan in a giant brownstone, and the woman who lived there raised Nim like her other children.
I breastfed him for a couple of months.
When Nim started to show more aggressive behaviors, like killing a poodle in a fit of rage, he was moved to a primate facility on the grounds of the University of Oklahoma. Nim would be taken to an empty, bare classroom with no toys or climbing frames and was forced to do language drills. There's a graph in Terrace's paper about Nim's language skills degrading with time when compared to that of a child, as in his utterances get shorter and shorter. And I can't help but think, yeah, of course they do, Terrace. The chimp's miserable.
We realized, I think all of us, that it was becoming increasingly difficult to pursue the experiment.
Nim was scratching harder, he was biting harder, biting more often, biting more people.
Following the collapse of the research field, Nim was eventually relocated to a sanctuary.
I mean, it looked like a prison. A really stark, ugly, dark, dank prison.
And Nim is screaming and holding onto me very tightly. And the only reason he let go is because he got zapped with the electric prop.
Terrace came back a year later.
You could see that he was like, holy shit, I'm going back to New York. It was like that. Like he was going to be rescued. You know, it was kind of sad. Herb never came back.
Next morning, he barely ate. He just started to crater.
Penny has often described her bond with Koko like that of a mom and her child, and given what we know about 8 researcher separation, it's probably good Koko and Penny weren't separated. But that revelation comes with a bitter pill. Koko wasn't so much a gorilla, she was a brand worth $8 million in 2013, and that brand had to be protected. People who worked at the Gorilla Foundation had to sign non-disclosure agreements, which is never a good sign. And in 2012, another open letter appeared from some of Koko's carers saying that Patterson's obsession with the gorilla prevented her from providing an adequate diet and healthcare. Koko was being fed a human diet, including chocolates, sweets, non-alcoholic beers, and Thanksgiving dinners. The Gorilla Foundation has not been secret about that, according to what's been documented in the Koko Pics blog. A USDA investigation into other gorillas in the Foundation's care has found multiple dimensions of neglect in the Gorilla Foundation, including gorillas being overweight and not being tested regularly for TB. In lieu of an actual vet, and to help make up for the deficiencies in Koko's diet, Koko was fed vitamin supplements. Multiple former employees said that Koko's vitamin supplements were recommended by Gabby Rita, a woman who, on her website, calls herself a certified naturopath and medical intuitive. Among other services, Rita offers chakra alignments and the removal of toxins through 25-minute power tune-ups over the phone, which cost, no joke, $80. You don't even talk to her. You leave her a message and then she will email you in a day, maybe, to tell you what water you need to buy from her. Oh yeah, Kel Surprise, she's a homeopath, and she put Koko on homeopathic medicine. Stellar work, Penny. There is also the nipple court case, real name. Koko had a thing for nipples, especially Robin Williams' nipples. In the AOL live chat, the word nipple appears a lot, and showing Koko your nipples was expected of employees at the Gorilla Foundation. 2 former employees sued the foundation because, according to reporting by the San Francisco Gate, on at least 2 incidents in mid to late June 2004, Patterson intensely pressured Keller to expose herself to Koko while they were working outside where other employees could potentially view Keller's naked body. On one such occasion, Patterson said, "Koko, you see my nipples all the time. You're probably bored with my nipples. You should see new nipples. I will turn my back so Kendra can show you her nipples." Now, our spotlight's on Koko here, but there's a lot of cloak and dagger around the other gorillas in the Foundation's care, like Michael, who was brought in to get Koko pregnant, but was too young to actually do it when he came into the Foundation's possession. Patterson's account of events is that Michael's parents were eaten by natives in the Congo, which is possible, it's a thing that happens in that region of the world. But Patterson then goes on to say that she bought Michael through the connections that she had with a filmmaker, and those who study the black market trade for animals will say that what often happens is that adult gorillas are poached and then their children are kidnapped and sold. So, depending on who you believe, Michael was either saved or trafficked. To look back on the ape research of this nature feels like looking back on a tragedy. Koko, Nim, Kanzi, raised in captivity, forced to live human lives, interact with humans, perform parlor tricks for humans, denied interaction with other chimps or gorillas in a wild setting. And they deserved better. Helen Keller was an American author, civil rights activist, and anarchist living in the United States at the turn of the 20th century. She was also deafblind, and she learned language through her teacher, Anne Sullivan. Keller would go on to learn how to read, write, and speak. What made language click for Keller was when Sullivan took her to an old pump house. Sullivan put Helen's hand under the stream and began spelling water into her palm, first slowly and then more quickly. In Keller's autobiography, she writes about the moment that she first comprehended what Sullivan was trying to teach her. This is when it clicked for Keller that the word being spelled into her hand was relating to the thing that she was feeling. As the cool stream gushed over one hand, she spelled into the other the word water, first slowly, then rapidly. I stood still, my whole attention fixed upon the motions of her fingers. Suddenly I felt a misty consciousness as of something forgotten, a thrill of returning thought, and somehow the mystery of language was revealed to me. I knew then that W-A-T-E-R meant the wonderful, cool something that was flowing over my hand. That living word awakened my soul, gave it light, hope, joy, set it free. There were barriers still, it is true, but barriers that could, in time, be swept away. In pop culture, that event is portrayed like this. This utterance didn't happen. It's a small change, but it's a change that puts the impetus on the wah. It's the spoken word. It's privileging communication that is meaningful to us. And I find it interesting that for our collective empathy to work, we needed to give this person a voice. We couldn't recognize the immense joy Keller must have felt finally being able to make sense of a world she had been locked out of without this wah. Which got me thinking about one final question. When we set out to learn if apes could learn language, was that even the right question? Why did we need animals to communicate on human terms? Why did Koko's validity rest on how human we could make her? Why is sentience our prerequisite for empathy, rather than just acknowledging a creature's right to be? When you come home from a hard day's work and your dog nestles next to you as you moan about your boss, does that dog need to understand the words you're saying to intuit something's bothering you? When dogs wait at the grave of an owner who's passed, or they wait at a train station for their owner to come back from work, does the dog need to understand the complexities of the working world for that act of waiting to be meaningful? When Nim became despondent after Terrace abandoned him, does it matter that he never learned to talk when he shows a pain that we recognize? It's been easy for science to sidestep these difficult questions about animal sentience and emotions, but the more we peel back the curtain, the more it seems that animals have deep inner worlds, like we do. I have no doubt Koko was an intelligent creature with depths and complexities that we never discovered. Now, how much apes really do resemble us in their emotional range and mental capacity is still a mystery. When she first met her kitten, she treated him with the same gentle, loving nature we would. And when her kitten was killed by a car, Koko was distraught. When Penny says Koko felt pain that she could never be a mother, I believe her. Am I anthropomorphizing her experiences? Yeah, maybe. We wanted to believe in Koko. So we did. I guess my question is, why wasn't Koko enough?
They have courage, honey. Do you have courage? You have courage. You look very courageous. You're good. Is there something I can do for you? Oh, honey, it's sad. I know it's a sad scene. Oh, and they're crying. They are crying on the movie. Oh, honey. And there's trouble. Sad trouble. Bad. Oh, sweetie, with the mother. Yes, the sweet mother. The one who adopted him. She's so sweet. Well, I know. It's hard to watch that, so you didn't want to.